I am Cherokee, Abenaki, and Lenni Lenape.
I happen to be of Mi'kmaq descent.
I'm from the Ponkapog Natick Praying Indian tribe, and I'm also a Croatan Indian.
I'm Narragansett.
Wendat First Nation descent.
I'm from the Aquina Wampanoag tribe here in Gayhead, Aquina.
We don't all look the same. We're here and we're not all dead.
Native Americans are an important part of our society, but it is shocking how little we really know about them or care about how they are portrayed in our culture. From sports teams using racist names and unflattering caricatures, to their portrayal in the media as either primitive, violent savages living in the Wild West in the 1800s or living in poverty on reservations. We don't realize how painful it is for them to endure Columbus Day each year when our society celebrates the man who first enslaved and massacred their people.
It probably feels like celebrating Hitler Day would to feel to you.
The negative stereotypes, myths, and misconceptions continue to take their toll.
You're living in this community, and everyone around you looks down upon you. You're going to start feeling generational, looking down upon yourself. This is part and parcel of why we have the alcohol problem and the suicide rates that we have.
A lot of people do like the whoop with their mouth. We don't do that. We do make noises with our mouth, but it's very personal, it's very spiritual, and it's not, what you see on the Hollywood movies, because 90% of that is wrong.
Every time a Native community would go on the attack or on the offensive and win, it was a massacre. But every time it was the vice versa, it was a glorious victory.
It's one of these things where I don't want to see the forgotten history. And as far as the imagery goes, when you see Native American imagery, it should always be respectful.
Today I will interview Claudia Fox Tree, member of the Arawak Nation, who has represented the Native American community at public events such as the Women's March in Boston in January 2017. I will speak with Chief Eagle Rising of the Greater Lowell Indian Cultural Association, Elder Chief Roaring Bear, and Chief Ladybug, along with members of different tribes at a local powwow and visit a drum circle. I'm Susan Abramson, Rabbi of Temple Shalom Emeth in Burlington, Massachusetts, author of Challah, A Chewish Guide to the Torah, and the Rabbi Rocketpower series of Jewish children's books, featuring my alter ego, Rabbi Rocketpower, the first ever female rabbi superhero. Welcome to Spiritually Speaking. Claudia, it's a pleasure to have you here, and I really wanted to learn more about your heritage for a long time. I've known you over the years. So why don't we start by just having you introduce yourself and a little bit about your background and your involvement in your community.
Sure. My name is Claudia Fox Tree, and I grew up in Concord, Massachusetts, and graduated from Concord Challah High School. Lived a few other places, and then settled in Bedford, where I raised my 5 children for about 17 years, and recently moved to Billerica. I was educated at public schools in Massachusetts and states colleges, and got my master's at Northeastern. And around that time, I also joined the board of the Massachusetts Center for Native American Awareness. I am Arawak. Most people don't know who the Arawak are, so I like to ask the follow-up question, which is, well, have you heard of Christopher Columbus? And most people have heard of Christopher Columbus, and what they've learned is that Christopher Columbus greeted the Indians, or discovered the Indians, or some version of that, and those Indian people had a name, and we were the Arawak people, Arawak being a large group and a language group with many separate nations on different islands, and ranging from Florida through that area, the South America and the Caribbean. But Columbus came to the land. He didn't really discover America, which is a different story. He didn't know it was a continent. And he met the people. But what we don't hear about is he takes 200 Arawak people to England to say, look at who I found. Wow. Let's enslave them. And they don't all make it. They die en route, and they are put into slavery, and that's not to mention the other kinds of horrible things he does to the indigenous people. And he gets the money to fund 17 ships where he brings mastiff dogs to hunt people down, chains, medallions, other weapons of torture and slavery. So he does a whole bunch of awful things, including starting the slave trade.
So when we celebrate Columbus Day, then how does that feel?
It probably feels like celebrating Hitler Day would to feel to you.
Yeah, so that's so, I think, important for non-Native Americans to understand that perspective.
The real story of Thanksgiving is about mass murder of indigenous people. The story that we're told is that an indigenous person greeted the pilgrims and helped them survive that first winter. The part of the story that's missing is that when Squanto came out of the woods and talked to the indigenous people, he had a whole life before that moment. And he spoke multiple languages, so he didn't come out of the forest going ugh or speaking broken English or anything like we're taught in the stereotype. He was captured by John Smith's men. John Smith of Pocahontas, John Smith. His men captured a whole bunch of indigenous people and brought them into slavery in Europe. And over the decade, learned all kinds of European languages and made his way back on a ship back to his homeland here down at the Cape, which we now call Plymouth, but at the time he called Patuxet. And when he got there, every single person in his village was dead in Patuxet. They had died of some plague. He became a helper to the pilgrim people that were there. People thought of the indigenous people as heathen savages.
Right.
And so according to their Bible and their religious law, they would never have broken bread or eaten with savages for a spiritual and religious event. And giving thanksgiving to God, which every Thanksgiving, if you go through the proclamations, are about, thanks to God, we're saved from those heathen savages.
How do you feel around Thanksgiving every year?
For me, it is a day of remembrance, and we actually fast the whole day, and then we just have a regular family meal later in the evening. Many times we go down to Plymouth Plantation, to the statue of Massasoit, which is on the land of Tisquantum, the Patuxet people, which is also where the first Plymouth people were. And every year since the 1970s, indigenous people started gathering there in a form of silent protest, having a small march and having some speakers. And so I'll often go there and hear what's going on. It's a very difficult time. I actually find the most difficult thing being when people say Happy Thanksgiving, which seems so casual.
Yep.
It's almost too casual for what the trauma that's really happened to indigenous people. Because we've been colonized, part of that colonization process has been taking our children and putting them into boarding schools and enculturating the dominant culture's values, from clothing to haircuts to language to traditions, and being told not to practice your own. And that happened up until 1978. And actually up till 1978, we weren't even allowed to practice our own religions and spiritual practices.
What percentage of Native Americans actually live in reservations, and what percentage are
So according to the last census in 2010, about 22% of all Native American indigenous people live on reservation. That means that 78% live out in the greater world. Partly that's because there was some active urbanization programs a couple generations ago, taking people off the reservation, again, taking away the culture and language that they know and popping them in the cities and saying, here's a couple $100, you know, become like everybody else, which didn't really work, but it wasn't like people went back to the reservations. And some of it was voluntary, or for whatever reason, people left the reservation. So there's a small percentage of people on the reservation, which is the poorest and most economically challenged areas in this entire country.
Why is that?
Well, the infrastructure isn't really there, and there's been a lot of damage to the places that people could have continued the traditional ways. So for example, on the Navajo reservation, the uranium mining that happened on the reservation polluted all the water. And so the Navajo can't even turn on their tap and use water. They have to have it trucked in every year in certain areas. And we're talking about 300,000 people in some areas
Wow.
that don't have access to water. And so part of it is that the U.S. government says, here's a reservation you can have, except for this little part where there's a mine, or except for this little part where there's oil. So all the places that the indigenous people could have made money to build the infrastructure don't exist anymore. And the ways that they could have taken care of themselves, for example, hunting and fishing, is destroyed.
You mentioned the word Indian, and when I first called you, I myself didn't know if that was an appropriate term to use.
So you could get a whole bunch of us together and get different opinions from everybody that you speak to. Historically, we were called Indian. At the time, people in India were not called Indian, so it would make sense to call us Indian, but nowadays it really gets associated with India, so it doesn't make as much sense. Native American and American Indian both have the problem of having the word American, and we were here before this became colonized and therefore called America. So for all those reasons, those words are just problematic. Nobody is going to complain if you use the exact nation name. I like indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere before 1492. It's a really long way to say it, but it situates exactly what I mean. People living on the reservation who've always used Indian. So the short answer is, there's just a lot of ways to say it, and I can't say there's one right way, because there's so many problematic ways other than the specific nation.
What are the biggest stereotypes and misconceptions about Native Americans that you would like to dispel?
The biggest stereotype is that we're all dead, or we only exist in the past, and we haven't become contemporary people living in today's society. That's the biggest stereotype. And the reason that stereotypes exist is because we haven't been depicted in contemporary society. Mm-hmm. When you look at movies and books and mascots, every way that you see us in society today is reminiscent of 1800s or older indigenous people, and it's usually a stereotype of the plains people, for example, or some other recognizable group with accompanying horses, teepees, feathers, and some kind of a tool, usually called a weapon, in their hand. After that, you've got other stereotypes that have built on that. So being lazy, being drunk, being savage, or even being noble, or what people might call positive stereotypes. So they aren't positive, because the problem with a stereotype is that it creates a single image or a single story, and then it gets applied to all of us. And we're much bigger than that single story and have not been able to tell our own story, our own narrative in our own country. We are unique with all other ethnic and cultural and religious groups in that other groups usually have a country of origin or a place where their religion is practiced, where they can be telling their story from their own viewpoint. We don't have that. We can't go somewhere else and say, oh, there's the movies and the books and the television shows that are accurate about our people, or even where our language is being spoken, or anything. We don't have that. The original meaning of Redskin is you would go to the trading post and you would bring your beaver pelt and your bear fur and your Redskin. And the Redskin was a scalp. Scalping was something that was perpetrated on indigenous people. So the scalps, the Redskins, is what that word is. You know, on the continuum of cultural appropriation to racist language, Redskin is way out there as one of the most racist terms you could use for indigenous people.
Wow.
But we've lost, as a country, we've lost our history.
Like saying the N-word for somebody
Exactly.
who's African American.
And a lot of people will call it the R word.
Thank you so much for being here, and we're going to go over to the powwow, and I also know we're going to be going over to the drum circle at your house to learn more about those specific rituals. But my hope and prayer is that we take this information and help to understand each other better.
I couldn't agree more.
So thank you so much for being here.
And thank you for having me.
Here we are at Middlesex Community College in Bedford, Massachusetts for an intertribal powwow. There are about 500 different tribes in New England, and many of them are represented here today. Members of different tribes are going to tell us about their faith, traditions, rituals, and practices.
I created this opportunity here at Middlesex Community College today. I work as a dean, and one of the things that I've realized is that there's no representation of Native Americans. So in the 5 years I've been here, I've worked towards educating people about the culture.
My name is Michaela Libby. My native name is Spirit Dancer, and I live in Lowell, Massachusetts. For us, when we're dancing in the circle, it's a form of prayer, so it's very personal to us. The jingle dancers wear this dress it's made out of like tin cones that they roll, so that when they dance it makes like a jingling noise. When you're making the dress, you say a prayer and you add a cone to the dress each day for 365 days. So it takes a whole year to make the dress.
So we're here with Ray, and I just met him out at the powwow. I understand that you're from Burlington, that you lived in Burlington for a while.
I sure did, yeah.
And now you live in Chelmsford, so
Correct.
I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your background.
All of my ancestry is from Quebec. I had a great Pepe, which means grandfather, that was a chief amongst the Huron tribe in the late 1600s. And, you know, with all of the diseases that came over as part of the European contact and obviously the fighting and everything else, they migrated to the east, and that's where they still have a reserve.
We're here with Leonard Rose.
So I grew up going to powwows, making various different pieces of artwork, traveled all over the United States and Canada.
We call what we wear regalia, all right? So for the common people, and you know, they're innocent, they don't know any better, they're not called costumes, okay? We will accept the word outfit, okay? But we prefer the word regalia. And usually you'll see it very unique amongst and distinct amongst the people that are here, because it's very personal, okay? For example, this is a ribbon shirt, what we call a ribbon shirt. I'll use this to dance with quite often. In this necklace you'll see here, it's something all of the men in my group, GLICA, Greater Lowell Indian Cultural Association, it's something that all the men wear. You know, it just makes a common bond between us, kind of a society. And we do have claws from different animals. I'm also wearing here is something we call a personal medicine pouch. The objects in here are personal.
We immortalize animals by using every part. So when people have turkey, for example, we'll use the feathers, we'll use the teeth, we'll use the feet. All of those become part of our regalia. Every part of the animal is used. And so again, we immortalize them. Their life goes on and it lives on in our regalia.
Just about everything I have on or whatnot is pre-European contact. And it's important to me to make sure people realize that we could still live without the Europeans' help. This is called a gastawi. It's not a headdress. What we would have done with this is we're basically just trying to camouflage ourselves, right? So if we're crawling or trying to get close to an animal, it's just camouflage. This particular gastawi is probably about 40 years old, and it was worn by somebody else before me. This is a possibles pouch. This is a pouch that this internal here, there's a pocket. This happens to be a snapping turtle shell. You'll hear people talk about, the rain god and the deer god and the buffalo god and all this, and the multiple gods, and thinking that we were, that we were multi-theistic, and we were not. We were monotheistic. We honored only one creator. But what people were observing as to why they thought otherwise is because of the respect that we have for nature, the respect that we have for the animals that give their life for us to live. We would still give homage to that animal that gave its life, and we would pray for that animal's afterlife. So when we're praying for that animal's afterlife, we're praying to our same creator. See that tree right there? That's my Bible. The grass, my Bible. The clouds, the sky, that's my Bible. I don't need a book to tell me how to treat that tree, or to tell me how to cry when that tree is hurt, or tell me how to feel bad if the wind is blowing smoke that is burning somebody's house. I don't need a book or paper to tell me how to feel about that. That religion is right there in front of us all the time.
Naming is part of our tradition. You must be named by an elder. When I was a child, I was born number 7 of 9 children, and I'm born in between 2 older brothers and 2 younger brothers. And my mother said, "You're pretty as a bug, but tough as a bug." So she calls me Ladybug.
Some names are given to you at birth, some names are given to you after certain personal spiritual events.
They would accomplish something or do something for the first time, and they would get a new name.
There is a coming of age time in your life. We don't really do a ceremony for it. It's more of a responsibility kind of thing. It's for men, when you turn 13, you're considered a man.
An elder is anybody who has aged, so it can be 50 and on.
We do our own personal burial, our own spiritual burial. When we cross, we don't believe it to be dying, we believe it in the next step of life. We do have a prayer and everything for it, but it's not because they're gone, it's because we want them to have good luck and everything in the next life.
Before we started our drumming today, we were outside and we did a smudging ceremony, which is a smoke ceremony that cleanses our spirit like water cleanses our body. And in that moment, we let go of the bad energies or any bad thoughts we have so we can be present in the moment. And the Rabbit song is a song that is a gift to Indigenous people as rabbits work together in families and couples and community and lead and follow so that what needs to get done can get done.
Thanks so much for watching. I hope we have been sensitized to the perspective of Native Americans and understand a little better how we have shared in their diminution in our society. It is my hope that we will find ways to help them regain the honor, respect, and dignity which they deserve. Shalom, Salam, Shanti,